Say a few words about the Friends of the Earth work on climate change, and then if I speak for 3 minutes max, 5 minutes, we'll still have 35 or so minutes. I'm reckoning we'll definitely finish at 8:30. We'll have 30 minutes for questions and answers and discussion. So just a few words about where Friends of the Earth is at with its climate change work and how it fits from what you've heard. I'm just 7 years now in this job, and Friends of the Earth in this incarnation had only just been launched and founded before I was hired. And the board at the time took a strategic view that really, if we were going to make a difference on one sustainability and justice issue, we need to be focused for a start, and that the obvious issue was climate change. That there was a lack of campaigning at the time. There were people working on climate change, but a lack of campaigning on it in any systematic and sustained fashion. And very quickly, I came, some of you will know, from an overseas aid and human rights background. Very quickly, it became clear to me that one of the ways that I thought we could connect with Irish people around climate change was to be drawing those international parallels and implications. One of the things that struck me forcibly at the time, although the figures have changed a little bit since, was that at the time Ireland was the 6th most generous country in the rich world per head of population in giving overseas aid. And most people they might have known we were 6th, but they would have known that we were up there, and they would have been proud of that. And it was something that we liked to feel was part of our national or international identity, that sense of solidarity with Africa and Latin America and the global south in general. What I discovered when I first began to look at the climate change figures and at Ireland's role was that we were also the 6th most climate polluting country in the rich world per head of population. And that when you began to see, as we've heard so eloquently tonight, that it's the people who have done least to cause climate change that are suffering first and will suffer most, you clearly recognise that situation is untenable and is a contradiction that you can't sustain for very long. So for me, it was a way into the issue to some degree, and also reinforced my belief that we should really try and work as closely as possible with the much larger overseas aid and development agencies compared to the rather small and, at the time, relatively weak, I think it's stronger now to some degree, environmental sector in Ireland. And out of that belief came our commitment to working in Stop Planet Chaos and more directly with Trócaire and Oxfam and Christian Aid on climate justice issues. But the second analysis then was, well, at the time I was the only employee in Friends of the Earth, although there was a board that had been there for, I can see someone smiling because they can anticipate the joke I might make, but I won't make. At the time, the board had put in place a very strong, for a small organisation, a very strong strategy and a strong funding base for the beginning. But obviously we were small, and we needed to try to find the thing, even on an issue like climate change, that would make the biggest difference for us. And after some consulting with other Friends of the Earth organisations and looking at Ireland, we focused in on the idea of climate change legislation. Not because it's the be-all and the end-all, or that at the end of the day, passing a law is in itself going to reduce emissions. But because what was clear from looking at Ireland's track record was, first of all, that it wasn't very good in terms of our emissions, but secondly, that it wasn't for a lack of policies that we were failing to keep our commitments. It was for a lack of joined-up government thinking and a lack of political will. As in, the climate change strategy the government adopted after signing up to Kyoto, they adopted a strategy in the year 2000. If they had implemented that strategy, we would not have had our emissions 25% above 1990 a few years ago. We would have actually been more or less on target, or certainly we would have been a much better chance of being on target. But the responsibility fell on different departments, and half of those departments didn't want to do what the Department of the Environment told them, and the Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, took no responsibility for actually driving forward that strategy. It lived in one department, although it supposedly had cross-government reach. So really rather messy and boring and administrative stuff, but fundamentally boiling down to how we do government, and how government design in the 19th century Britain was or was not fit for purpose for tackling 21st century issues that cut across the usual neat categories of transport, environment, energy, agriculture, health, etc. And climate change is clearly one of those issues, although I think we're finding more and more issues cut across departments like that. So we have departments that work very much in silos and very much turf warfare between them, and not very strong central coordination. And also we have an issue that is seen, to some degree, as we've said already, as remote and abstract. And not very amenable to the 24/7 news cycle and the 5-year electoral cycle, when it often falls beyond that horizon. And the idea of a climate law is to put our targets, not necessarily to set new and ambitious ones beyond what we've already agreed to, but to put those targets into domestic law, because often we don't pay attention to what we've agreed to at European level until very much. It doesn't go through our parliament in any way that we can get our hands on as citizens very much. Whereas when we put things into national law, as we found out, people pay attention. And also then you can put in place the structures to actually enforce timely decision making, accountability to Parliament, independent expert advice and reviewing of what that's doing. So in some cases we were saying, it wasn't for lack of policies. There's lots of the pieces of the jigsaw there that need to be put together, but what nobody was seeing was the picture on the front of the box to see how the jigsaw should go together. And the climate change legislation is designed to be the frame of the box, so to speak. So we know what we're trying to achieve and where we're going to go to, and it gives us a way of putting the pieces together. That campaign went along, even now, it's clear that we've made progress in the sense that at the time we launched the campaign in 2007, immediately only one party put climate change legislation in their manifesto for the 2007 general election, and that was Labour. It wasn't in the Green Party manifesto, although the media narrative now is it's the only reason they went into government. It wasn't actually in their manifesto. The campaigning that we and others did over 2 years or so meant that they did put it into their second programme for government in 2009 and made some progress immediately after that in terms of getting a framework agreement on what that legislation might look like. But then, as you know, we began to be increasingly overwhelmed by both economic crisis and political chaos. Despite that, in the last Dáil, there were 2 bills produced around climate change, well, more than 2 probably, but 2 significant ones. One by an all-party committee of all parties, obviously, produced by backbenchers, essentially, of all parties, and one produced by the government. So one had cross-party backing, one was, to put it kindly, stress-tested by the civil service and by the permanent government and by the Attorney General. So they were different bills with different emphases, but they both had their strengths and weaknesses. Neither of them got to the floor of the Dáil before the last government collapsed and the election was called. One of them was debated in the Seanad. We did see, however, as that one became live, real pushback from strong vested interests. And in this audience, there's no point in beating by the bush. That was IBEC and the IFA. And we saw that any real effort to contain Ireland's emissions and for Ireland to do its fair share, we're not asking Ireland to do any more than that, are susceptible to strong lobbying from people who have a vested, as in a financial interest in particular outcomes, as opposed to a public interest like Friends of the Earth and Trócaire and others have. Most of that was, and this is, I suppose, a sign of hope for the future, most of that was, to put it kindly again, misunderstanding or misdirection and misinformation. There was nothing in the law that challenged one sector more than the other. The only reason to oppose the laws was if your actual position was Ireland shouldn't meet its targets. It was actually being opposed based on, oh well, we need to do one sector over another, so we shouldn't penalise farming or penalise energy-intensive industries. But actually, the only reason to oppose it would be if you didn't think we should do less than our fair share. 20% reduction by 2020 is less than Ireland's fair share. It's simply where we've got to in terms of the European negotiations for now. So the good news is that all the parties, in the advance of the last election, unlike 5 years ago, all the parties in writing committed to climate change legislation. And they might have meant different things about what that would look like, but they all committed to it. And it's in the manifestos of Labour and Fine Gael, and it's in the programme for government that they signed up to. Obviously, it wasn't the first item on the agenda, given both the economic crisis and given the political debacle that there'd been just 1 month before the election around climate change had, to some degree, poisoned the issue for a time. The government then had, as you may know if you've followed either Trócaire's emails or Friends of the Earth emails, the government, or the Minister for the Environment at least, had a bit of a wobble in November when he seemed to be suggesting we should defer work on the climate bill for at least 12 months altogether, not do anything about it for 12 months, and discuss instead policies, and only start working on climate change legislation when everybody's agreed on everything we'll do to meet any target that might ever be in the bill. Whereas, which is something, living in a utopia, whereas it's the other way around as far as we're concerned. Put the European targets, not new ones, just the European ones, into domestic law. Put in place a policy cycle that